Originally built in 1913 as an improved trainer for the Farman Flying School, the MF-11 was quickly co-opted by various militaries across the globe as an observation aircraft and light bomber. Seeing service throughout the war in Italy, Serbia, France, and even Japan, the Maurice Farman MF-11 helped give the Entente an early advantage when the guns of August opened fire. I'm the Wolf of 1918, and this is an aviation deep dive into the MF-11. The origins of the Maurice Farman 11 can be found in some of the first biplanes made by Avions Farman, especially with its direct predecessor, the MF-7, which had been made to act as a training aircraft for the Farman Flying School that Maurice had built. Fitted with a centrally supported nacelle, it was set up in a pusher configuration to allow for a clear field of view up front. Oddly, although designed in 1912, it held the rather archaic design choice of having an elevator placed in the front of the aircraft, a clear showcase of its origins within the 1907 voice and biplane design. Fitted with a 70 horsepower Renault 8-cylinder engine, it was only able to achieve a speed of 90 kilometers an hour, 56 miles per hour. In comparison, the similar, albeit smaller, British DH-1 used the same engine and was able to reach speeds of 128 kilometers an hour, 80 miles per hour. This, as it turns out, was in part due to the immense drag caused by the forward elevator and its associated rigging. Even still, the MF-7 had become extremely popular as a trainer, observer, and bomber within the French Air Force, and would prove to be an extremely hardy aircraft. When the First World War broke out, the MF-7 would be the airplane to carry out the first French bombing raid against Germany. But that's a history for another video. Maurice came to the conclusion improvements had to be made, and so began the creation of the MF-11. The forward elevator and its rigging was removed, the tail section was completely overhauled, and the nacelle was made to be a bit more spacious, with enough room for eventual engine upgrades. The wings were also lengthened to 16.13 meters, the overall length shortened to 9.48 meters, and the height was lowered slightly to 3.20 meters. Fitted with the same 70 horsepower Renault engine, its empty weight was reduced to 501 kilograms. All of these changes saw its maximum speed increase to 100 kilometers an hour, or 62 miles per hour. And like clockwork, the French military was placing orders. But it wasn't just the French military. The Japanese government took a keen interest in the biplane, and several manufacturer firms bought production licenses. Slightly modifying it by shortening the wings by 1 meter, it entered service as the Japanese type M.04 shortly before the First World War began. With the immense military interest, Maurice would construct a larger version of the MF-11 with a 100 horsepower Renault engine built and designed specifically for military use. It was far less popular than the MF-11 and saw very limited use, especially as larger engines ended up having no issue fitting on the much more popular MF-11 airframe. All the MF-12 ended up doing was delay the eventual deployment of the MF-11 within French squadrons, to the detriment of the French readiness for war in July of that year. Britain, too, had a manufacturer of their own, the Aircraft Manufacturing Company, buy a production license and supply the Royal Flying Corps with a brand new aircraft, which started entering service sometime before June of that year. These would be known as the S-11 Shorthorn, with the MF-7 also having been built under license as the S-7 Longhorn. Italy got the hint and began the same process in May, starting licensed production of the MF-11. The Italian manufacturers also modified them to fit the requirements of the mountainous terrain in northern Italy. The first, the SP-1, was almost exactly the same, using a 100 horsepower engine. The next variants were created to meet the challenges faced in the air during the war, with mixed results. The SP-2 saw the wings increase to 16.74 meters and the airframe lengthened to 10.7 to give it better aerodynamics. The engine was upgraded to an A-12 260 horsepower engine, giving it an increased useful load and a max speed of 135 kilometers an hour, 83 miles per hour. The SP-3 saw a decrease in wing length to 14.71 meters and length to 10.5. Using the same engine as the SP-2, its speed was increased to 145 kilometers an hour, 90 miles per hour. The final Italian model would be much different than the rest. With a wingspan of 19.8 meters and a length of 10.7, the SP-4 was powered by two 190 horsepower IF V4B engines in the tractor configuration, giving it a max speed of 151 kilometers an hour, or 93 miles per hour. Production of the SP-1 was initially delayed due to the outbreak of the First World War in August, and Italy would only have a couple dozen when they joined the war the following year. These military versions utilized more powerful engines, including the 80 horsepower Renault, the 80 horsepower Dion-Bouton, the 100 horsepower Renault, the 110 horsepower Lorraine, and the 130 horsepower Renault, just to name a few. While this meant performance varied, most reports show a maximum speed of around 106 kilometers an hour, or 65 miles per hour. With the outbreak of hostilities between the Entente and the Central Powers, the MF-11 was still in the process of being issued into service within 4 of the Royal Flying Corps' 5 squadrons, and was yet to be in active service with the Aéronautique Militaire, French Air Force. It is possible the MF-11 or MF-7 played a role in the discovery of the gap between the German armies during the First Battle of the Marne, but that is unknown and unlikely. Several flaws also became apparent, with its use as an observer aircraft becoming noticeably less effective in practice due to a unique issue. The pilot was seated up front, with the observer seated in the far more enclosed back. This, with added lessons learned from the first few months of the conflict, gave Maurice what he needed to fix the actual issues with the design. This new airplane variant, the MF-11 bis, would first fly in late 1914, entering service in 1915, very quickly replacing as many original MF-11s as it could. However, this didn't stop the MF-11s in service within the British and Japanese militaries from accomplishing several feats of their own before the year's end. On September 6th, an M04, the Japanese MF-11, launched from the seaplane carrier Wakamiya and attacked the obsolete Austrian protected cruiser Kaiserin Elisabeth. While this was the first recorded air-sea battle in history, it didn't amount to much, as both ended up with no damage whatsoever. The Kaiserin would eventually be cannibalized for its cannons to protect the German colony at Qingdao, before being scuttled right before the fortress's surrender on November 7, 1914. During this time, Britain had outfitted several of their S-11 Shorthorns with bombs, having seen the effectiveness of the MF-7 and other medium-sized scouts at the role. This would culminate in the first nighttime bombing raid of the war. Conducted on December 21, 1914, 18 16-pound HERL, high-explosive Royal Laboratories bombs, were dropped over German artillery positions near Ostend. This happened only hours after Germany dropped its first bombs on British soil using an outdated Ettrick Taube, targeting the Admiralty Pier in Dover. With the start of 1915, more MF-11s were entering service, with the MF-11 bis not too far behind. Several MF-11s were shipped to Serbia in February as a way to inject the surviving Serbian military with a much-needed boost in the form of an actual air force. These were almost immediately put to use, attacking Austrian gunboats and securing several victories over Austrian aircraft. They would remain in Serbia until the country's fall to the combined Bulgarian and Austrian offensive in 1916. That same month, the Belgian Air Force also received a few MF-11s to outfit a squadron. A few months later, on April 17th, one Lieutenant Ferdinand Jacquet and Lieutenant Henry Vindevogel were flying one of these MF-11s when they spotted a German Albatross. It isn't known what model it was, although it was most likely an Albatross B-2. Firing past the pilot, the observers were able to shoot it down, marking the first confirmed aerial victory of the Belgian air services. Later that year, Belgium received a further 16. These were fully replaced by the MF-11 bis by the start of 1916. By that point, the original MF-11 design had almost been fully replaced by the brand new MF-11 bis model, especially after the losses suffered during the early months of the Fokker Scourge in the second half of 1915. With the wingspan extended 18.15 meters, some variants of the MF-11 bis had shorter wings, and a more powerful 130 horsepower Renault 8-cylinder engine, the MF-11 bis proved itself to be a more capable aircraft, reaching a speed of up to 130 kilometers an hour, 80 miles per hour, and having a greater useful load, making it the perfect platform for a light bomber, as well as its standard use as an observation aircraft. While an improved aircraft, low production left many of the older MF-11s still in service, and with some of my sources not differentiating between the two, I won't be either unless necessary. Now, there was a floatplane variant of the MF-11 that had been made before the war, and several examples saw great use by Britain during various coastal campaigns, proving extremely useful during the Gallipoli campaign as an observation aircraft, although not much else is known about these unique versions of the MF-11. With 1916 came new changes. MF-11s used within observation groups were fitted with a brand new wireless telegraph, allowing them to send real-time observations back to command. This proved extremely useful during the Battle of Verdun, especially since the MF-11 ended up being the only reliable bomber and observation aircraft the French had available in the area when the battle first began. In August, MF-11s were sent to Romania after they had decided to join the Entente. These would remain an active part of the Romanian Air Force as frontline observers and bombers until the end of the war. Over on the Italian front, the SP-1 and SP-2 hadn't had much of an impact. Their performance was rather inconsistent. However, with only 35 or so of the model available for service in 1915, it was hard to tell if it was just happenstance or not. The events of 1916 answered this question. Far more were entering service, and they played a crucial role in the Battle of Asiago, being able to hold its own against the Austrians while obtaining vital reconnaissance information. However, it was obvious they were starting to lose their edge. This saw the development of the SP-3, which was unable to overcome the challenges faced by the SP-2 and SP-1, quickly earning the nickname Coffin for Two by its Italian crews in 1917, and the aircraft was slowly moved into its new role as a trainer. The SP-4, however, remained an active part of the front until the end of the war. There also remained a few of the previous Italian MF-11s in service in Libya, not being retired until 1922. In all, only a handful of the SP-1, around 402 SP-2s, 300 SP-3s, and 150 SP-4s were made. Just over 600 of the MF-11s were also built by Italian manufacturers as well. As the massive battles on the Western Front dragged on, from the Somme to Verdun, the MF-11 began showing its age. The German Luftstreitkräfte had learned how to take down entire flights of the airplane with surgical precision, and missions flown without a heavy escort would rarely come back with more than half the aircraft in repairable condition. Even the MF-11 bis was showing signs of its age, and by the end of 1916 it was rare to see an MF-11 flying a combat mission in France at all. Most French squadrons saw the MF-11 replaced by the newer Farman F-40 by November of 1916, with the older airplanes being used as trainers. Britain would end up sending off their remaining S-11s to Australia to use as trainers as well. In Africa, the Middle East, and Macedonia, the MF-11 remained a practical airplane, and served its role well until the end of the war. In Japan, the aircraft remained in service, being improved over the years until its final retirement in 1923, being the last known country to do so. There are only 3 surviving MF-11 aircraft I could find. One is in the Canadian Aviation Museum. Another S-11 Shorthorn is still around in the Royal Australian Air Force Museum in Australia, and a Belgian MF-11 sits in the Military History Museum in Brussels. There are no known survivors of the MF-11 bis. Going back to the MF-7, there is a company building a flyable replica based on the original plans and using an original engine. Flying Restorations, based in the UK, has been working on it for some time, but I haven't seen any updates newer than 2023. I reached out via email but haven't received a response as of this recording. I will add a note in the comments if I hear back from them.